Okay, today I'm talking about compound gouge bevels. Here I have what was initially a palm curved number 1. It had a flat edge on it, and it was meant for grounding in places where you need to get a rather steep, higher angle, and just kind of do that, flatten, ground some things. Maybe you need to go in and chop some things in the corner. Not a lot of utility with it. What I've done is make a 45-degree cutting edge and then graduated that back bevel out wider toward the standing end of the tool stock. So where the bevels come away from the actual cutting edge to that standing stock is increasingly a higher number. So if this cutting edge is 45, then back here where the bevel meets the tool stock is around 53 or 4. And what this allows me to do is face increasing resistance as this digs into the cut, because I don't want it to go too far. Right? Now if I did 45 all along the length of both sides as the straight version of this in the Stubai catalog is laid out, then this tool would just continue to dig in and dig in and dig in and dig in. There would be no resistance that then forced it out of the cut or just gave me a steady pressure at a certain cut depth. So by this being flared out increasingly toward the tool stock and away from the cutting edge, then that resistance will hold it at a certain depth for a given pressure. In other words, to get more cutting depth, I have to go in at a slightly higher angle, give it more pressure, and then ride at that pressure to cut at an increased depth. And this is where graduated bevels come into play. Okay, I thought about certain thing that I should divulge here. I've been talking about this as a 45, when in fact it is 90 degrees. Now, from the split in this bevel, the two sides, from there it is 45 and 45. But it is not overall a 45, because the use of this is not as a single bevel graduated bevel chisel. It is a dual bevel graduated bevel chisel. Okay, so how to think of this? For instance, if we were to use this to go in to a corner, let's say we've got a typical corner here, a wall meeting a wall, right? And we need to take down some raised hump here in that corner. We don't go straight in to the corner with this tool expecting 45 to meet 45 and we get 90. This is meant to come in and go this direction with one 45 up to there, and then cant it over and go with the other 45 to there. So it's more of a slicing action than a gouging action, although it's not a knife. The graduation on each side allows for a control of depth of cut with that gouging motion 45 off of that center split between the two bevels. Let's consider if we did take this in straight to that corner, then what's going to happen is, since this plane, the top, the non-bevel side, the top is at, let's say, 0. Depending on the angle, there's a certain depth at which the corners of both cutting edges will disappear. And then you're more likely to pry up, this point would gouge in, and then these corners would disappear below the surface of the wood, more likely to pop out grain on either side of it as this was covered. You see what I'm saying? So you're fine as long as the wings are out, but once the wings both go below the plane of the surface, not so good. Not so good, because you're no longer cutting, you're prying. For example, I have a 41 here, which is just a series, it's a combination of two wings that are, overall 60 degrees from the split of the two wings, 30 degrees each. So you can see that it's sharper than a 45. If we're to draw this, let me get rid of this real quick. I'm going to draw this out as we're looking at it, like this, about that angle there. So we've got a wing and a wing, right? And then there's this center portion which runs down the spline of the stock of the tool. And you can see that's maybe 3 or 4 millimeters wide. And where the bevel stops, it's say 3 millimeters wide, but at the very apex, it's maybe 1/4 of a millimeter in width. So we've got this going on. With a wing here. There's the outside of the wing, and there's an outside of the wing. And then there's the spline of the tool. So the spline of the tool here, the back of the stock, when it gets up to the edge of this bevel here, I should draw that correctly, then that width that it's flared out to here then begins to narrow to a set point there. And this increasing width is what holds a certain depth of this once we cut in, right? So we're cutting in, and here there's not a lot of pressure. But once you cut the width of the base of the channel that this will cut, much further than that, you can see by here, by say 1/3 of the depth of what the wings will allow for, this is pushing its way out of whatever this cut. So there's increasing pressure the wider this gets. So even though this is similar, it's a reverse of the tool I've made here. We're still dealing with wings. Now these wings, they're in a different orientation, but you don't want to use a tool like this into the surface of wood below the tips of those wings, because then you will no longer be cutting. The top portion here be more likely to pry and break wood out. So try to always keep your wing tips above the surface of the wood. Now there are people who will skew these wing tips forward or backward depending on the angle that they're cutting. If you're doing something on the outside of an arc, you may want these, say, faced forward. If you're doing interior cuts and you've got one of these that is a long sweep, an arc to it, you may want those wings faced back, like leaning back this way. There's different ways that you can manipulate this. This is standard stock. It's right at a 90 from the spline along the wings. I've not canted them forward or backward. But the point of what I want to talk about here is the graduation from this leading edge of the cutting edge to the thickness of the spline of the tool stock. That has to increase. If it doesn't, then this tool will just dig and dig and dig. It'll dive. It'll dive on you, and it'll be really hard to then level it out and cut at a consistent pressure and depth. Now, why is this important to bring up here in this case? Because it's the same principle. That's just a bit more of an extreme example of what's going on here, right? So even though this is 90, I'm thinking in terms of 45. With that, I'm not really thinking, oh, it's overall 60 and 30 to 30, because the spline gives me two totally different things I don't really have to focus on that much. I know what that's doing. For the most part, when I use that tool, I'm thinking about the center line of it. 2 wings. This, I'm really thinking of it as 2 individual 45s. Do you see what I mean? Even though the overall is 90, I'm not thinking of it as 90 because I don't want to use it as one of these. I don't want to come into a corner straight at the corner, you know, and like plow my way in equally to both sides, because I would run the risk of burying both corners of the chisel. Whereas if I use this at a slight angle, I arc it and move toward one wall and then arc it the other direction and move toward another wall. I can think of it as a left cutter and a right cutter, instead of like, oh, an equal temperament cutter would just bury the wings and it would pry wood out, and that's not very good. But with the arc of a graduated bevel that I'm explaining in this video, yeah, there is going to be pressure at the back edge of this bevel when you come in. So then you can slice into that corner and you can slice into this corner because there is a graduated bevel there. I hope that makes sense. In the Stubai catalog, this is considered the straight version of this, with a 45 cut angle to a 45 stock, the end of the bevel, where it's consistently 45 and 45, is a Stechbeitel einseitig geschliffen. So it is a wood carving chisel ground on one side. Not a great description, but you know, I mean, it fits for their version of this tool. This is technically a 21, meaning it's got a curve and it was a 1. It's, in my mind, closer to a 28, which is a long bent number 7, I believe, cut. I love those. And if you look at a number 27, whether, you know, palm size, micro with a short handle on it, like I've done here, or a full-size tool, then you'll notice that there's a 7 at the cut, but a graduation to more of about a 5 where the bevel meets the tool stock. In other words, there's no more bevel. And that again is so that you can go in with a graduated depth and feel, right? The steeper you are here, you can dig in, but as you dig in, that graduated, the widening of that arc of that actual bevel is going to give you more resistance. So it's going to force you out of it, or it's going to force you to level at that depth for a given pressure. So you'll notice these things in other bevel edge tools like this. I go through it in the video and describe, and it might not be the clearest, but in how to come in at one side and the other, and then lay back a little bit and go for a more flatter approach. The further you go back this direction, the flatter it's going to get. So like that would be totally flat, right? Vertical would be totally flat. But the further we go over this way or over this way, the closer we're getting to a steeper angle. Meaning, what I have here now, what I just described to you, is a 45. Let's call that a 45. I'm not the greatest artist here. But let's say that's 45. And here is the difference in the two edges. We're looking at the back of the tool now, the bottom of it, the actual bevel side of it. And let's consider this straight and this straight. Then down here, you can see this is steeper than this. This would be 45 degrees. This right here would be, say, 53 degrees. And if we divide this 4 ways, say if that's 4 millimeters from the very cutting edge to where the stock has no bevel to it, then It would be just I don't know what equal, but that would be 8, 4, so 2. Let's say this is 45, that's 47, that's 49, this is 51, and then right here finally is 53. See what I'm getting at? So you've got 4 pressure gradients along the bevel between the cutting edge and where the bevel stops and the stock starts, that you can go that depth at whatever pressure 45 requires, and then whatever pressure 47 requires. And so as you look at this, know that this is going to be canted more this direction. 47 is going to be flatter, 49 is going to be even flatter, 51 is going to be flatter, 53 is as flat as it gets. Given that there is a bit of rounding going on here in the stock part, but it's more important to think of this line and this line than this surface, whether it be flat or slightly convex.